When it comes down to reboots and remakes in any artistic medium, I really have to think first things first. What is the artistic goal of this film? What is it really trying to achieve? The difference here between film and video games is that for the most part, film as a medium has a better track record of having more artistic integrity than video games in terms of reboots and remakes. Here we have a classic case of film being made in a more economical sense due to Platinum Dunes scoring big with the Texas Chainsaw and Friday the 13th reboots. Inherently, it's not a bad thing to use this as a sort of soft launch to bring these series back into the mainstream and make them relevant again. Though if you ask me, they were always sort of relevant, especially since Freddy vs. Jason came out in 2003, the same year as the Texas Chainsaw remake, which gave it a big boom in popularity to have slashers be scary again after the meta era that Scream ushered in. Darker and grittier versions of classics were being remade, and at least for the most part, they have some sort of artistic goal. With the Texas Chainsaw remake and the Rob Zombie Halloween films, you could see a clearer intent, a recontextualization of familiar monsters. Rob Zombie especially leans into a psychological character study of Michael Myers himself. Does he succeed, or is it any good to watch? That's up for you to decide, pal. Point is, there was actual reasonings put into making a reboot. A new jumpstart for this series. With Nightmare on Elm Street, it's quite exiguously proportioned in terms of its originality. Only a fraction of the concepts added are something new and aren't harping on the original's ideas, like the microsleep concept and fully leaning into the Predator angle rather than leaving it as, subtext. Let's start there actually. The way this film handles Freddy as a pedophile and why it feels like such a tonal and structural miscalculation. The film deals with subject matter that is very much relevant in the real world, especially when the biggest political leaders are exactly what the main villain of this film is. Just as a preface, I want to choose my words carefully and stay respectful. If you can't handle such topics discussed in depth, you should probably stop watching this video. Your peace of mind is worth more than this fugazi-ass film. The problem here with this depiction is both the victims and the predator in terms of writing. Even though it's deliberately binary, it's written in such a way that makes the whole thing feel processed in a very shallow way. For example, we have a dream sequence, probably the first major interaction between Nancy and Freddy. He puts his hand on the wall and slowly glides one of the finger blades between her thighs, saying things like, "My little Nancy, no one can prove I was here. You smell different," while licking her face in a tightly framed shot that forces us to sit with every sound and gesture. On the other side of the coin is Nancy though. After experiencing that literal nightmare, and I want to stress this again, I speak on no SA survivors at all. Anything I say about Nancy from here on is spoken about analytically rather than sensationally, so consider it more so speculative speech rather than certain fact. Having that happen to her, we would assume this would immediately reshape her psychological state in a more sustained way, unless it's seriously buried deep within her subconscious. This becomes more complicated later, when Quentin dreams about what happened to Freddy. Both Quentin and Nancy then confront Quentin's father, accusing him of covering up the truth and protecting an innocent man. You can see where the problem here lies, right? It's the very structure of the film. The way these scenes are edited and placed in their direct spots within the film makes us, the audience, feel quite stained. By this point, the film has already communicated information that severely undermines the ambiguity it wants to create. The film never really does enough or keep it vague at all for us not to be so certain that Freddy was indeed a predator, which shocks me to a certain extent, because if you look at a lot of reviews or overviews of this film, you see a lot of folks going, "Oh, they keep it vague enough to seem as if he's innocent, and that would have been really cool if they stuck with it." That would have been kinda rad in retrospect, but it just simply is not like that. How do you see a scene like the dream sequence with Nancy, having him say such heinous things and not know that he's used to it? Literally, right after Nancy states he's a nightmare, he responds with, "That's right, nobody can prove I was here." All I can think to myself is, are the writers trying to infantilize us by this form of structure? I doubt they ever had the intention of having him be truly innocent for this fact. In some cases, horror depends on where the camera asks us to stand psychologically. Are we aligned with the victims, the monster, or somewhere in between? In this film, the way the camera aligns itself in these types of scenes, in conjunction with the editing, it makes us, the audience, feel bad or dumb as if we missed a scene of sorts. Through that combo, the film repeatedly places us in situations where we're being asked to entertain uncertainty that the film has already undermined. Instead of being dazed and confused, that's a good-ass movie, with the leads, we're waiting on this linear story beat for them to catch up till we get hit with the generic climax. Why suddenly is this film trying to impose the idea that we should be just as confused as our two leads? This structural identification causes a sort of disgust within the viewer, by pushing us so up close and personal to the form of assault we are seeing, as well as the fact a little bit after in the film we are being told that he's supposedly innocent. While watching that, we end up feeling kind of gross because we structurally aligned with Freddy. What makes this structural identification even more troubling is that it's built around a Freddy Krueger who is never allowed to flesh out and be his own menace without the pretense of the most despicable parts of him being fronted in such bad taste. If the film asks us to align with our two leads in their belief that he is innocent, then we the audience are owed some psychological texture, a reason to look at him as the villain rather than look through the eyes of said villain. Yet Freddy, we're given, is neither a tragic figure nor a fully fledged terrifying monster. He's a contradiction dressed in a very weird prosthetic. So I guess this is a good segue. Opening thesis type of deal on it being a reboot, set up the problems with him being a pedophile, but now it's time to ask, who is Freddy in this film, and why does his characterization actively undercut any chance the story had of earning our discomfort? First things first, let's analyze him to what he's based upon. Freddy from the original film. Freddy Krueger's powers have always depended on proximity. He invades dreams, occupies intimate psychological spaces, weaponizes the vulnerabilities of his victims against them, even though an argument can be made that he doesn't really do that till like the third film. Yet the original 1984 film never allows this proximity to erase the distinction between predator and spectator, because Freddy is presented as a highly individualized presence. Every nightmare bears the imprint of his personality: the burnt face, the striped sweater, the bladed glove, the theatrical cruelty, and the almost playful sadism all function as markers of an identity that remains external to us. Even when the film places us inside Nancy's dreams, we are not experiencing events through Freddy's eyes, we are experiencing Freddy's intrusion into Nancy's subjectivity. The nightmares belong to Nancy. Freddy's presence is invasive precisely because it is so clearly separate from our own. We know who he is acting upon. This distinction becomes crucial when comparing the original film to the 2010 remake. The remake frequently positions Freddy through scenes that invite a form of structural alignment with predatory behavior, while simultaneously stripping away much of the characterization that made the original Freddy function as an individualized monster. Where the 1984 Freddy leaves behind a recognizable psychological fingerprint in every dream sequence, the 2010 Freddy often feels less like a personality and more like a collection of signifiers attached to the taboo subject matter it very much attempts to tackle. As a result, we as the audience, positioned as spectators to scenes such as the aforementioned Nancy dream sequence, or even the classroom scene with Chris, where the film has him say, I quote, "You're just as beautiful as ever," we begin to see the distinction between observer and participant blur in a way that feels less deliberate and more accidental. The camera moves closer, the imagery becomes increasingly explicit, and the film gradually places us in spaces that feel adjacent to Freddy's perspective. However, unlike the original film, this proximity is not balanced by a strong sense of Freddy as an autonomous, dramatic presence. We are pushed closer toward the perspective of the predator without being given a compelling individual or character to examine. The irony is that the original Freddy is the more expressive and theatrical character, yet he creates a greater distance between himself and the audience. The remake Freddy is comparatively hollow, but the film repeatedly places us closer to him. One version invites us to witness a monster, the other risks making us feel trapped within the mechanics of predation itself. The discomfort that results is not necessarily the productive discomfort of horror. Instead, it often feels like the film has lost track of where the audience is supposed to stand. Now, just for some humble clarification, somebody might bring up the super rad telephone scene from the original. And say something like, well, hold on, didn't we have a super close-up shot of Freddy sticking his tongue out to mess with Nancy? Isn't that literally the same thing? And to that I say, not really, pal. The distinction in that scene isn't a proximity thing, it's the orientation. The original film constantly never loses sight of whose nightmare we're inhabiting. The shock comes from the sudden jump scare of what happens in Nancy's light sleep. Even when Freddy's right up in the camera, he's still functioning as an external contaminant invading her space. The remake, reboot, whatever, they have Freddy repeatedly linger on his predatory behavior in a way that draws our attention toward the predator rather than the victim. One film asks us what this nightmare is doing to Nancy, the other increasingly asks us to sit and soak in what Freddy's performing. Not to mention the fact that whatever 2010 Freddy is doing is quite realistic to what real predators would do to their victims. The tongue out of the telephone is very surreal and otherworldly, a funkadelic usage of how the dream world operates. Rather than the radical reinterpretations of other slashers, this film is super lame on the aspect that it tries to carve out the skin of the original but not have the soul of the original. For example, the Freddy coming out of the wall scene apparently cost like 10 cents just to get the spandex to have such a stylishly groovy shot in the film.
Simple one was he wanted to have a figure pressing against the wall then showing the whole figure of the man. I said, how are we going to shoot that?
That scene, they literally, I remember at 8 in the morning, they're like, how are we going to do this? And Jim Doyle's like, well, I really think we should just go out and buy this new material. It's called spandex.
Yeah, the rubber wall that everybody thinks is rubber. I went off down the fabric store and got spandex. So then we just made a panel of it, stuck it over the bed, and pushed on it a couple times, and it was like, this might work. That would be me. That would be my face, is Freddy in that particular shot.
Nancy stirs.
I think that's my hero shot.
Freddy's got to come back. And
we didn't know what it would look like. I just said, just press your face against it and press your hand out, and we'll see how it looks. And we looked at it like, whoa, that's really terrific. But, you know, it cost 10 cents.
While you have the reboot cheapening out on all fronts, not only in the writing department, but also with prosthetics. It looks very weird. You can have some shots, depending on the lighting, where he could look very dopey and dumbfounded looking. It's like that thing with some anime, where if you pause randomly, like in a JoJo episode, it looks absolutely ludicrous.
You really shouldn't fall asleep in class.
Not to mention, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's fundamentally no reason as to why he has the finger knife glove. He was never a child murderer, as all of the children he abused were abused sexually. That's why he's picking them off within this film. That is something that could be considered as a nitpick, I suppose, but it is quite lame, and at least to me shows that the folks didn't really have much care to this project at all, for getting a piece of very simple origin. Even all the performances are quite jaded in a way. Rooney Mara, who plays Nancy, is genuinely a great actor, so maybe it's the inexperience, but she sounds so stilted and bored. Some of the scenes, except the confrontational one with her mother, seems as though she's mumbling through her lines just to get to the end of the shoot. This causes a clash within the acting because on the more quiet side of Jackie Earle Haley's performance of Freddy, it is a lot more menacing and vengeful, but when he's trying to sound angry, he sounds like that tub Christian Bale Batman, which scoops you right out of the scene. And that's a wrap. I mean, blech. What a movie. Derogatory. Not very fond of this, though. Back in the day, I was really scared of it. It's one of the first movies I remember being particularly scared of. Like, just complete fright. And now almost nothing phases me as I'm passing down the horror scrolls to anybody who's willing to sit through a bunch of horror films with me. Yeah, I don't know. If you really want to watch a good-ass nightmare movie, go watch Nightmare on Elm Street 1. Like, bona fide classic. Set more fantastical energy to the genre. Not to mention the practical effects, even the performances, the whole atmosphere, the music. Oh my goodness gracious. I'm so glad I have the DVD collection with the bomb-ass New Nightmare Freddy in the back. And that shows it formed through all the slip covers or whatever. It's so fire. I love Nightmare 1. I love Nightmare 2. I love Nightmare 3. I think Nightmare 4 is pretty good. 5 sucks. 6 sucks, but it's hilarious. New Nightmare is also fantastic. And Freddy vs. Jason is also good. Other than that, you know, you got the Nightmare reboot, which is this whole video, and it's fucking dog shit. It's really bad. Made me feel icky, you know? Made me feel yucky. That's never a good thing, and I had to express my thoughts. Didn't expect to make a whole video. I just expected to write like a little humble letterboxd review, but I guess sometimes you really gotta push that analytical side of yourself. But yeah, that's all I got saying. Got much to say for this outro. But yeah, peace and blessings. Love y'all, and play DMC3.